There's through ICANN and IANA, there's actually root servers that they work alongside web registrars that have to report where your authoritative domain server is for your domain name. Like the entire top level .com, anything .com. The root servers for .com are actually ran by VeriSign. Every top level domain is actually, there's an organization that actually handles that,
.org, whatever.
and it'll work its way back to those. So if we have just a machine here and it says, where's beta.example.com, it'll check its local DNS server. It could be a domain controller, it could be the router itself. It'll then reach out to the root server and ask the same question. It wouldn't know, so it would then take it up to the .com top level domain server, which would say, I don't know, but it would actually know where the authoritative server is, because it works with the web registrars at that point. To say, well, because when you set up a web domain, you actually have to put in where your name servers are.
Right.
And that's why you have to put that information in there, is because that's where that information gets tied to your domain name.
Now, I don't want to interrupt necessarily this if you're in the middle of it, but for example, at GoDaddy, the registrar, GoDaddy as a company provides name servers, and all the web hosting that I've ever done on my own,
Yep.
I just put in ns1.godaddy whatever,
Yep.
but I see that we have domain servers as well, in that
Mm-hmm.
we've got ns1.indiana telephone network and all
Mhm.
that. I guess, can anybody run a root name server?
Not a root name server. They could do an authoritative server for a domain they own.
I see.
So if you owned john.com,
Sorry, take it.
yep, I'm sure it is. You could, when you registered it, you could point your name server to be any address you wanted, and then you would actually host the authoritative box for that domain.
I see.
So where this comes into play for us, if we get a ticket where we need to change a DNS record for a domain, and the first thing we would have to do is know where those records for that domain are. The easiest way to do that, like if we had williamjamesmorris.com, we could just do a whois. You can do a whois from anywhere, just whois.com even. And we would just do williamjamesmorris.com. And it actually checks the domain registration, but it tells you where the name servers are.
Mhm.
Those are what's authoritative for williamjamesmorris.com. That's where the records need changed. Which is our cloud host box.
And our cloud host box is what is referred to by ns1.indianatelephonenetwork.com, right?
Kind of.
Or is
In
it a
that
guest
sense,
inside that box?
They are. NS1 is also cloud host. NS2 is a replicate. It actually replicates the data to NS2.
I see.
So it's just a separate box running bind. Bind is basically just the DNS services on a Linux box. Sometimes called named. So if we wanted to actually look at these records, we could pull them up if we went over here to the bind DNS server. Bind zones matching. And here's what a zone file actually looks like. For every domain, you have a zone. It sets global TTL, but that can be changed per record. If no TTL is listed, it uses your global. And time to live is how long, once a DNS server in the path that's being queried actually grabs a record, it starts a timer, and it'll leave that record in cache until the TTL expires.
That way there's not bad data in the cache all the
So,
time.
yep. So if you end up making a change, and you have a really high TTL, and you make a change on your authoritative server, it could take however many seconds are in your TTL before it's globally updated to the outside world. It's not instantaneous. So DNS can take a little while to propagate.
Is there a best practice for TTL? Is 5 minutes better or worse than 5 hours?
Well, the shorter your TTL, the more queries your server is going to have to deal with, because every single time someone requests it, it's going to be timed out along the path if you had a super short TTL. So you don't want to go too high to where you can't make changes, but you don't want to go so small that you're just hosing your box up with tons of requests. So really it makes more sense to do it by the service. With things where you might have failover or changes, like with our VoIP deployment, we keep a relatively low TTL in case we have to change or move or point something. Otherwise, keep it relatively high.
What is usually relatively high?
12 hours, 24 hours?
I wouldn't even go that high. I would probably do, at the most, 3,600 seconds, which would be 1 hour.
Okay.
Really? Like GoDaddy, for example, I think they say it takes up to 12 hours to propagate. Or
Yeah.
is it just an up to, that way you're not sitting
Yeah.
there refreshing it all day?
Mhm.
I see. Those layers.
So you got a ticket about training.William James Morris. This is where we would add the record. It would go to this zone file.
Okay.
We wouldn't actually.
You don't modify that file directly, do you?
You can, and in lots of environments where you're just running this straight from the command line, this would be the only way to edit it. One thing to note is every zone file has a serial number. Oftentimes it's just set up as like the Unix timestamp or date, just so that way every time you update it, you need to change it, because if something queries the zone again, it checks to see if that serial's changed, or it won't pay attention to your changes. Just right in here.
I see.
Notice that way down here.
Increase serial number automatically.
Webmin's smart enough to give you a button so you don't have to remember to
That's
do it.
nice.
So this is where we would actually add the record for training. William James Morris. That would just be a simple A record, which just goes from a name to a single IP. Then there's a whole bunch of other types of records. There's reverse, which is, they call them reverse addresses here. They're also known as PTR records, pointers. They go the exact opposite of an A record, where they resolve an IP to a host name instead of host name to IP. We have name alias. Bind likes to name things a little different than what you see other places. Name alias is a CNAME, which is just which is basically like a DNS pointer. It points a name at another name.
So for like subdomains, that kind of thing?
Yep. Or if you were hosting your website with Google, you had a Google site where your address is like sitename.googlesites.com. Then we could create training dot with a name alias to go to training.googlesites.com. So that way you can still use your URL of training.William James Morris, but it's actually CNAMEd to a differently hosted site. Mail server are MX records. So that's where you stick in all your mail services.
That's where SMTP goes to look to find IP addresses of servers, recipients,
Yeah.
senders.
If you were, when every mail server, when it has to send mail out to a domain, it checks with DNS to to find its way all the way back to an authoritative server unless a server along the path has a name cached. It then finds the MX records and returns all of them, not just the first or the priority, and it then chooses from that list. It knows their priority, which is often just referred to as weight, using the lowest weight first, and sends it off to there. They can be names, they can be addresses.
Have you already added that training dot?
No, we're gonna do that as part of this.
Okay.
So right now, if we try to do a ping to William James Morris,
There's no response.
we get nothing. Could not find that host. That actually went all the way out. Found the authoritative box, which is this. If we had pulled up the CLI and ran a tail on the files that were actually showing the traffic,
We'd see the
or,
ICMP.
Yep, or we're Wiresharking it, we would have actually just seen a request on port 53 for the result of training by William James Morris for that query. You wouldn't have to know the IP that training dot William James Morris.
I know where it's hosted on DreamHost.
Let's
It's
take a quick.
hosted on the Adrian box. So for FTP and SSH, it's adrian.dreamhost.com.
Alright, so there's the IP that we needed to resolve to. So we would come over here. This is different depending on what DNS server you're using and how you're using it. But we pretty much use bind for everything here, except internally. Of course, use Microsoft's DNS services. And we're going to create training address, update reverse. We could leave that to yes, but it wouldn't be able to, because that's not an address that we hold. We'll just leave it. WilliamJamesMorris.com. Depending on the DNS services you're using, often these have to be set with either just the host, which is also referred to as subdomain, but that's kind of confusing because it's not always a subdomain, it's just a host. Where it's just that with a period after it. Sometimes they want the whole URL. Really kind of depends on what DNS servers you're using. So we'll create that, and we can see training.
So now when we ping that, it should return from that address.
Well,
in theory.
Almost. Before we do that, we have to apply, and we have to apply the zone. So it applies the changes to the zone, and then we have to apply our configurations.
Which is updating that quote-unquote text file, or that...
Yep.
Yep.
It is actually
A text file.
server-side to this static text file. So now if we were to ping that, we still don't get anything.
Is that because it hasn't propagated or what?
Nope. Since it wasn't created, it should get created. It should be able to find it automatically. Because before there was nothing to check. Now there is. Now we kind of have to do a little investigating into how Sheldon set this up. set up two replicants that both get pointed at. So, yep, you're actually right. We do need those NS1 and NS2 boxes that are listed on the domain to actually pick up the changes from here.
So it just hasn't replicated yet?
Yep. Had NS1 or NS2 actually been pointed at this box running all the records, it would have been instantaneous. Just after
You
that,
mean the
changes would
domain
have been-
NS1 dot?
Yep.
I see.
I was under the impression when Sheldon and I had talked that this was NS1 and he set up NS2 as a replicant, but that must not be the case. That is not the case.
So what has to be done to fix that?
Nothing. Now we just gotta wait.
Hmm.
We'll do admin at ns1.telephonenetwork.com. SSH isn't necessarily part of the training because no one would need to know this part.
I already know this part. Mm-hmm.
So, well, that must be Ubuntu box.
What is it you're doing now?
Connected to the server
Oh,
through
I was gonna-
SSH.
I was going to try to.
But he can't.
Box, then there shouldn't be any. Then there wouldn't be any propagation time.
Right.
Right now, we're just.
But right now we're kind of, because we're on a Comcast connection here
Yep.
remotely, it's taking a little while for it to propagate.
Cool, I get it. So now, in theory, then, training.williamjamesmorris.com should resolve to the Adrian DreamHost box, right?
Yep. After doing a flush of the DNS on this local box, it worked just fine. ipconfig/flush DNS.
So we just needed to flush the caching.
Yep.
Cool.
So, training.
I actually don't know what the document root is on DreamHost, so we'll see what happens.
Well, at least we didn't get 404.
Cool. So now that's where you have to just put the
It's in the right neighborhood. I just need to get it to the right address now.
Cool.
Awesome.
And that's DNS in a nutshell.
Got it.